Shalom and greetings, friends. Thank you for clicking on part 2 titled The Unknown Perpetual Covenant. And the reason I call it unknown is because too many people do not know about it. And most of you who have Christian backgrounds were taught that there's just two covenants, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. But as I covered in part 1, and if you didn't listen to part 1, please go back and listen to part 1. You can Google, or search it I should say, on YouTube, The Unknown Perpetual Covenant part 1, or go to our website, www.torah.truthseekers.org. That's Truth Seekers. Torah, T-O-R-A-H, truthseekers.org, O-R-G. And part 1 is very important because I covered a lot of important ground that I don't want to cover again in this one. Our camera only goes 29 minutes and 51 seconds. Our new camera, our old one, only went 10 minutes. At least we've upgraded a little bit with some blessings. And we want to upgrade technology, get truth to the nations in any way, in any technology that He can bless us with. And so thank you for listening to part 1. If you have not, please go back and listen to it and just come back to this one. Because I covered the different covenants. Some covenants our Creator makes with the people, and they're perpetual. He even calls them perpetual. And it has nothing to do with faithfulness to Him in that regard, like the Noah covenant. He says He'll never wipe out the earth again with a flood that will kill all the people and all the animals on the earth. And also there's the Abrahamic covenant that I covered, the Davidic covenant, and how I covered the Sinai covenant as well, and went finally into this perpetual covenant 7 chapters later from the Sinai covenant. That's part of the covenant, but it's perpetual. He's actually segregated this covenant, and I would more technically and accurately call it the Shabbat covenant, or some of you in English would say Sabbath covenant. A special covenant that He has made. And I also went in part 1 in Isaiah chapter 1. And some people point to that and say how our Creator says to the Israelis, I hate your feasts, I despise your assemblies and your sacrifices and so forth. And of course, when we start to take His ways and make them our ways, because if we go back to Leviticus chapter 23, as I mentioned in part 1, that our Creator says these are His feast days. And He spells them out. He gives us the weekly feast days and Shabbats, and then He gives 7 annual Shabbats in the same chapter. And He doesn't call them Jewish feasts or Jewish Sabbaths. He says these are mine. And when we change them in any way, and we want to keep them on other days, or say we want to keep every day a Shabbat, we are changing what He has said in here, then they become our feast days. They become ours, and they're not labeled as His, as we see in Scripture. And they were prophesied. I was just getting to, in part 1 at the very end, where in Genesis, or as we say in Hebrew, Bereshit, chapter 1, and in verse 14, these feast days were prophesied way over 2,000 years before the Jews ever existed, the Jewish people and the Israeli people, before Abraham and Isaac and Yaakov, or we say Jacob in English. His name was changed to Israel. And so notice this in Genesis chapter 1 in verse 14. He says, and then Yud He Vav He, that's the Hebrew letters for our Creator's name. Our Creator said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens. Lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs, or as we could say, beacons or flags, in the firmament, and seasons, and for days, and also for years. Now, seasons, we think in English, summer, winter, spring, and fall. These are not those type of seasons. If you take out even your Strong's Concordance here, you'll see that seasons is Strong's Concordance number 4150. That's 4150. And it says here, it could be a fixed time, an appointed time, a season, a festival, sacred assemblies, feast days. Of course, it's referring to Shabbats, his appointed times. And finally, he puts it in writing for his people, as we see in the covenants of the Sinai covenant. You know, the people says, okay, whatever you say, we are going to do. And so he puts it down in writing what his feasts are. You know, and so we need to, as we understand that, and if you want to understand his calendar, even to determine days, you know, we don't go from midnight in the Hebrew, in the biblical calendar, the sunset. The sunset from sunset is the beginning and ending of each day, and it's more complicated to determine a New Year's Day. And so I have a free booklet on our website titled, it's our Creator's Calendar, YHVH, Yud-He-Vav-He's Sacred Calendar. And I go from a historical and a biblical perspective, putting it all together over 2,000 years of history to really explain what his calendar is like, if you want to know what his appointed times are. His times. And he is sovereign over time, not us. And as we'll see in the scriptures as we continue, as we try to do things our way, then he becomes displeased when we change what he says is his way. As we read about in Isaiah. And he said this is a sign. And now in Isaiah, we read that, but let's go to Ezekiel. Oh, before we go to Ezekiel, let's go to Deuteronomy. Because we as humans like to blend and intermingle wrong theology with his appointed times or any kind of worship of him. We would rather blend in sun god worship or even other pagan doctrines, but is that okay? Is it, oh well, we're not worshiping those gods anymore, doesn't mean that to me anymore. Well, notice in Deuteronomy, or as we say in Hebrews, Devarim, chapter 12, beginning in verse 29 here, or I guess you should say, take heed to yourselves in verse 30 that, 29, when our Creator, your Elohim, cuts off from before you the nations which you go to dispossess, and you displace them and dwell in their lands. And all of us are dwelling in lands that have been taken over and have taken over previous cultures. Whatever we are at, wherever we are at today, this can still apply to us. He's put us in the land where we are right now. He says, take heed to yourselves that you are not ensnared to follow them. This is the people, the pagan cultures of replacing their land. After they are destroyed from among you, that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? I also will do likewise. Now, not just serving their gods, but notice what our Creator says here in verse 31. He says, you shall not worship Yud-He-Vav-He, Yahweh, Yehovah, Adonai, if you prefer, you think his name is too holy to say. You do not worship the one true Creator, your Elohim, in that way. For every abomination that our Creator hates, he hates, they have done to their gods. For they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. This is talking about human sacrifices. And if you just research the origins of Easter, we call it Easter today, or Ishtar, you'll see that that goes back way before the resurrection of our Messiah. You can see that the first Sunday after the spring equinox was when all the pagan cultures did their human sacrifice. In fact, right there at the St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome is the altar where they would impregnate virgin women on this annual day, and then those babies would be born 9 months later, of course, and then the next Ishtar Sunday, those babies would be 3 months old, and they would sacrifice those babies right on the altar. And then they would dip the eggs being symbolic of the gods of fertility, because chickens lay a lot of eggs, rabbits reproduce a lot, gods of fertility on Easter Sunday. These are the gods, the pagan gods of fertility. They would take these eggs, they would dip them in the blood of these babies, these innocent babies who were sacrificed. And it's really gruesome, and it's really sad to think about that. But what our Creator says, do not worship me in the way that they worship their gods. You need to get these pagan practices, these sun god worship practices. If you want to blend sun god or pagan worship practices and think, well, it doesn't mean that anymore, I'm going to worship the true God in that way. Well, he's saying in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 29 through 30, that he hates this. In fact, in verse 32, he says, whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. You shall not add to it or take away from it. And we want to add to things. We want to take away from his words. And he'll just love me anyway. Well, that's what Israel thought. Notice, let's turn to Ezekiel chapter 20, referring to the perpetual covenant. Like I said, it's perpetual. Here it says in Ezekiel 20, verse 20, verse 19. 2020 is an easy number to remember. If you got 20/20 vision, how about 20/20 spiritual vision? I want all of us to have 20/20 spiritual vision here. In verse 19, though, he says, I am Yud-He-Vav-He, your Elohim. Walk in my statutes, keep my judgments, and do them. Hallow my Shabbats. And they will be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am Yud-He-Vav-He, your Elohim, your Creator. You will know that if you start keeping them. You will find out more about him. You will become more like him in ways that you may not see if you haven't been keeping them yet. Notice in verse 21, notwithstanding, the children rebelled against me. His own children rebelled against him. Are you his children today? They did not walk in my statutes. They were not careful to observe my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. But they profaned my Shabbats. They profaned them. Then I said, I would pour out my fury on them and fulfill my anger against them in the wilderness. So the 10 tribes who became lost, isn't it interesting? Those 10 tribes broke off from Judah and Benjamin. They've kept the Shabbats. That perpetual covenant, nobody doubts that they are sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, or Israel. They have not lost that sign. Even as rebellious as they are, this is a perpetual, unconditional sign. And not that you're saved or eternal saved by this sign alone. Of course, we cannot be. We cannot earn our salvation. We've all sinned and fall short of that glory. But we can be grafted into Israel. As I talked about in part 1, I went more into detail with that. And we need to not be anti-Semitic. If we've got anti-Semitic prejudice or upbringing or anything in our ancestry that has progressed into our hearts and our minds, and ways that we can't help. We need to overcome that. We need to pray for help to overcome our anti-Semitic attitudes and realize that these are not Jewish feasts. They're not Jewish Shabbats. They are His, if we keep them according to what His Word. And we're going to go to see what the Brit Hadashah, what our Messiah says later here. But so hold on to your seats. Please don't get offended. Please don't stop listening. If you're offended, please ask for help and revelation. Help me to understand things. If you want to make comments and I don't consider certain scriptures or points of view, feel free to contact anytime through our website, our email. But continuing on here is these 10 tribes became lost, the lost 10 tribes. And they don't even know who they are today, but He is waking them up. He's waking us up. You could be a lost Israelite and not know it. But it doesn't really matter when it comes to spiritual salvation. We are all to be grafted in, whether we are Jew, whether we're Gentile, whether we are lost Israelites somewhere out there floating around like a rolling stone. You know, we are to be picked up and not lost anymore and to be found. And so it is important to understand which Shabbats He's talking about. And can every day be a Shabbat? Or can we just pick and choose? In Isaiah, we read about the beginning of Isaiah in part 1 where our Creator says, I hate your feast days. I despise your sacred assemblies, your worship services, because there's iniquity in them. Well, Isaiah, later on, after saying that, writing that under inspiration in chapter 26, or 66. Please go to Isaiah chapter 66 with me. And it says in Isaiah 66 verse 22, as for a new heavens and a new earth. So we have a new earth here. Do we have a new earth? Or is it still polluted? Do we have a new heavens? No. This is a prophecy of the future. As for a new heavens and a new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me. This is what He's saying. Says our Creator, so shall your descendants and your name remain. It shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbat to another, all flesh will come before me. Now it doesn't say just the Jews or just Israel. It says all flesh will be keeping the same Shabbats. They will be keeping this perpetual covenant. The Abrahamic covenant has not been nullified or done away with, nor the Davidic covenant, nor the Noah covenant. And so we need to understand the difference between perpetual covenants and how covenants will go in and be grafted into other covenants. One covenant doesn't just nullify and delete all other covenants. Now in part 1, I did cover the obsolete covenant in Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 13. And I covered that pretty thoroughly. I don't want to cover that ground again. So please, if you didn't listen to it, please go back and listen to it. It's less than 30 minutes of your time, your precious time. And I appreciate any time you put into studying, researching, testing all things, proving all things. Don't just believe me or anyone out there. Be careful of even the comments that people make on my videos. There's a lot of racist people out there. There's people who think that they are the superior master race, whether they're white, whether they're African American, whether they're Jew, Orthodox. There's people that grow up in these backgrounds that are taught these things, and they haven't come out of them yet. And I'm trying to wake everyone up. I love you all. I even love those who might be considered enemies. So let's try to learn from the scriptures and think outside the box of whatever our culture is, our background, whatever our skin color is. We've all got the same colored blood, okay? And we all got the same Creator, the same Messiah. And let's give honor and praise and glory to that. And we should all be keeping the same Shabbats. to be one body, not a schism or a divisions of bodies or cut off and mutilated body. We are to strive to become one, Jews and Gentiles alike. And what about our Messiah? Our Messiah says, let's turn to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24. I don't even need to turn there. I know it. Our Creator, under inspiration, and our Messiah says in Matthew 24, under inspiration, he says, pray. And he's referring to the end of this age. In verse 3, if you go back to Matthew chapter 24, verse 3, his disciples say, give us the signs. Let us know what it's going to be like before you're coming, before you come and set up the kingdom. And he gives all these signs, and he says, pray that your flight, your exodus, at that end time will not be in the winter. Man has no authority or control to change the seasons. We can't change winter. Nor on the Shabbat day. Read it for yourselves. Dig out your own Bible. Don't just believe me. Our Messiah, Yeshua, HaMashiach, the Messiah, most of you know him as Jesus, the Greek name. He said, pray that your flight be not on the Shabbat. If every day was a Shabbat, why would he say that? And if we can just pick and choose whatever day we wanted as Shabbats, why would he say this too? Well, okay, my flight's on the Shabbat. Well, I'll just make next 3 days later from now, I'll make that a Shabbat. Or I can have any day of the week as a Shabbat. Well, if we do that, there are Shabbats. They are not his Shabbats. And so, please, if you've never kept the Shabbats before and you're still listening to this, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to all this. If you've gone this far with me, you're probably struggling. It's going to have to roll in your mind for a while, like a rolling stone. You're kind of rolling. You've been found, but you're still kind of lost. And the most difficult struggle you're going to have with his Shabbats is laying down your own life. Your life. Being willing to give it up to him. To bear that cross, as we often say. It's not, I'm speaking figuratively, of course. It's not easy. It's a narrow, straight path into the kingdom of eternity. But once you do, you have to give up what is most important to you sometimes. Well, you might be thinking, well, what am my family going to think of me? My friends. I do this on Saturdays. I can't do that anymore? Oh, that's horrible. Our Creator wouldn't want us to do that. Remember when Yeshua was in the house, crowded house of people, and they said, hey, your mom and your brothers are out there. And he says, my family is right here. Where is your family? Is blood thicker than water, or is water thicker than blood? He's going to put you to the test. So you might think, I can't afford to financially provide and pay my bills, my job. I have to work on the Shabbat. I can't give that up. He can't provide for me if I give up my job. Well, it's kind of silly when we think about it, right? But that's what's holding us back. What about asking your boss or your employer and just say, hey, I've been convicted now, my religious beliefs, and I'm thankful for I can't be discriminated in this country. Hopefully you're in a country that doesn't discriminate. If it is, you have to be careful and wise. And Yeshua said, those who seek to save their life for my sake will lose it. So whatever we have to give up, sometimes we have to give up, but the blessings will come. And you might be thinking, well, I need to do my laundry or my yard work, or I do my shopping on this day. I can't keep the Shabbat. Surely he's not going to make me give up things like that. That's my life. Well, are you willing to lay down your life for him? Not just talking the talk. I'm talking about walking the walk. And those of us who've been keeping Shabbats can testify, yeah, it's difficult in the beginning. You have to give up some things. But then all of a sudden, it becomes the best day of the week. We love this day. It gives us more time to do things that we even love more because we become more like Him. It's a joy. It's rejuvenation, not just physically, but spiritually, in ways that we just don't even have time during the week. And we take this time out, it's His time. You know, how many hours are there in a week? 168? And He's only asking for 24 of those in a special, higher level way. And as we do that, all of a sudden, all those other hours of the week, those 144 hours, we all of a sudden we were like, I seem to be getting more things done. And I'm not just spinning my wheels anymore. Things are happening in my life that never happened before. And wow, this is great. Just talk to somebody who's been keeping Shabbats for a while. Well, some people, they love the world, they love the things of the flesh more, and they're still going to hate the Shabbats. As the Apostle Paul, or Shaul, says in Romans 8, verse 7, a carnal mind is enmity against our Creator. We need to cut that carnal mind. We need that spiritual circumcision to remove that from our hearts and our flesh. And we need to walk as He walked. We need to realize that He has a perpetual covenant that has not become nailed to His crucifixion. It has not been done away with. It hasn't been nullified. And it is a very important covenant. As Paul says, Shaul says in Ephesians chapter 4:17, you Gentiles are to no longer walk as the Gentiles walk. You need to come out and be grafted in Romans chapter 11, into Israel, the olive tree. Wild branches, lost branches that have been cut off, let's get back on the tree. Let's get grafted in. He's willing to split that tree and cut it open and just shoot us back in there and bear good fruit and be a light to the nations and to always walk in His covenant, in His contract, His agreement with us. The perpetual unknown covenant that I've covered is the Shabbat covenant that He has made with His people, with His children, Israel. And if you're not Israel now, I pray and I hope and I teach and I try to bring as much as I can to you, for those of you who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who thirst and hunger for His character, His mind, His righteousness' sake, forever and ever, in His kingdom and in His family. Let's read His words, drink in it every day.